What happens when an entire generation decides they've had enough? Not just of corruption, not just of empty promises, but of a system that has failed them at every turn.
And they want to control us just like a dictator.
In Nepal, that moment has arrived. Gen Z, the country's youngest, loudest, and most connected generation, has taken to the streets in a movement that started online but exploded into reality. Their protests have been so relentless, so widespread, and so powerful that today, Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli, one of Nepal's most dominant political figures, has been forced to resign. This is not just another political shakeup. This is a youth-led uprising that could reshape Nepal's future. And tonight, we break it all down. The rise of the protests, the reasons behind the rage, and the fallout of Oli's dramatic resignation. To understand why this moment is so historic, we need to rewind a bit. Nepal is no stranger to political instability. Since the end of its monarchy in 2008, the country has cycled through more than a dozen governments in less than 2 decades. Coalition collapses, party infighting, and corruption scandals have become almost routine. KP Sharma Oli rose to power promising something different. Twice serving as prime minister, Oli portrayed himself as a nationalist leader who could stand up to foreign influence and bring stability to Nepal. At one point, he was praised for bold stances on sovereignty, including challenging India in border disputes and balancing Nepal's relations with China. But over time, his leadership came to symbolize the very things young Nepalis despised: corruption, broken promises, and the entrenchment of an old political elite that seemed more focused on power games than on solving real problems. For Generation Z in Nepal, the frustrations are deeply personal. Imagine growing up in a country where every election is framed as a new dawn, but every government collapses into the same cycle of scandals and incompetence. Unemployment among the youth has reached staggering levels, with thousands leaving Nepal each year in search of work in the Gulf, Malaysia, or even further abroad. Those who stay often struggle to find opportunities, facing rising costs of living, stagnant wages, and underfunded education. Add to this mix the recent economic strains and inflation, and you can see why frustration boiled over. This generation feels abandoned, left with no future at home, while their leaders enrich themselves. And unlike older generations, this youth is globally connected. Through social media, they see how young people in other countries fight back against corruption and misrule. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter became not only outlets for frustration, but also engines of mobilization. Every revolution has a spark, and for Nepal's youth, it came in the form of allegations of widespread government corruption and mismanagement of public funds. When reports surfaced that billions earmarked for development projects were either unaccounted for or wasted, the anger that had been simmering for years erupted. Student groups organized rallies, which quickly swelled into mass demonstrations. At first, they were peaceful: marches, chants, sit-ins. But as the government cracked down with arrests, tear gas, and rubber bullets, the protests grew fiercer. Videos of young protesters being beaten by riot police spread like wildfire online, galvanizing even more young people to take to the streets. It wasn't just Kathmandu. The protests spread to Pokhara, Biratnagar, Chitwan, and beyond. Suddenly, Oli was facing a nationwide youth revolt unlike anything Nepal had seen in decades. The protests turned violent, streets filled with tear gas, stones hurled back at heavily armed police, government buildings barricaded, and tragically, several young lives were lost during the clashes. For the protesters, those deaths became a rallying cry. Rather than scaring them into silence, the violence only deepened their determination. Leaders of the youth movement declared that Oli's government had blood on its hands. The country was at a breaking point. Even senior figures in Oli's own party began to panic. They feared the unrest could spiral into a crisis that would destabilize not just the government, but the very structure of Nepal's fragile democracy. And then, the inevitable happened. Under immense pressure from the streets and facing rebellion within his own ranks, Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli announced his resignation late last night. In his speech, Oli struck a defiant tone. He blamed what he called external interference and accused misguided youth of destabilizing the nation. But to millions of young Nepalis, his words rang hollow. For them, this was a victory, proof that their voices, amplified by social media and powered by sheer determination, could bring down even the most entrenched political figures. Now, Nepal stands at a crossroads. Oli's resignation leaves a power vacuum, and opposition parties are already jockeying to form an interim government. But the bigger question is, will this moment translate into real change, or will it simply lead to another round of political musical chairs? For Gen Z, the resignation is just the beginning. They are demanding more than a change in leadership. They want systemic reforms. They want leaders who are young, accountable, and connected to the realities of everyday Nepalis. They want jobs, better education, transparency, and an end to corruption. But achieving that won't be easy. Nepal's political establishment is deeply entrenched, and the forces of status quo won't step aside without resistance. At the same time, the country's delicate geopolitical position between India and China means that international powers will be closely watching how the situation unfolds. What does this moment mean for Nepal? It's too early to say for certain. But one thing is clear. This is not just a political resignation. This is a generational shift, a loud, defiant statement from Nepal's youth that they will no longer sit quietly while their future is squandered. Whether this leads to meaningful reform or descends into another cycle of instability will depend on what happens next. But history will remember this moment, the moment when a generation, armed with nothing but their voices, their phones, and their courage, brought a prime minister to his knees. And perhaps this will inspire other young people across the world who feel just as abandoned by their leaders to rise and demand something better. What do you think? Is this the dawn of a new political era in Nepal, or just another twist in the country's long history of instability? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to hit like, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dive coverage of global events that matter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.